I lifted my bride's veil to kiss her on our wedding day, but the woman looking back at me with tears in her eyes wasn't my bride at all. It was my ex-wife. For 3 years, I hadn't spoken to Josephine, not since the day she signed the papers and walked out of the life we built, and now here she stood in another woman's wedding dress, in front of 200 guests, her hands shaking as badly as mine, whispering something that stopped my heart cold. I couldn't let you do this. I'm Nathaniel Calloway. I'm an architect, a man who builds things meant to outlast him. And in 4 minutes, I was supposed to marry Margot, the kind, easy-to-love woman who never once asked me to be anyone other than who I already was. I had a second chance at happiness standing right in front of me. The plans were made, the vows were spoken, and everything was finally fine. But my ex-wife had just lifted that veil off of everything I'd spent 3 years trying to bury, and the tears in her eyes weren't about losing me. They were about something neither of us had ever said out loud. So why would the woman who left me risk everything to stop me from getting married? What was she so desperate to protect me from on the happiest day I was supposed to have? And what did my bride know that I didn't? Because somehow she was nowhere in that chapel and Josephine was wearing her dress. Her hand was still resting in mine when it happened. The pastor had stopped talking. The organ had stopped playing. Even the leaves outside the window seemed to stop falling for a second, like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do next. I didn't move. I couldn't. Because to understand why Josephine was standing in front of me, in that dress, with those tears, you have to go back 5 years, to a backyard full of paper lanterns, to a night when I thought I had already found the one thing in my life I would never have to question again. We got married in my mother's backyard, on a warm night in June. Josephine wouldn't let anyone buy the lanterns from a store. She said store-bought ones didn't have any soul in them, so she made every single one by hand. And when she walked across that grass barefoot, holding a bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked herself that morning, I remember thinking, there is nothing on this earth that could ever take this feeling away from me. I was wrong, but it would take years for me to understand how. We were good at being married, not perfect. I left cabinet doors open. She left her shoes in doorways like little landmines I'd step on in the dark. We argued about nothing and made up over coffee before the mugs even got cold. I built things for a living, tall and permanent, and she taught 7-year-olds how to paint, and most nights she came home with color somewhere on her skin she swore she hadn't put there. Then one morning, she came out of the bathroom holding a little white stick, and her hands were shaking exactly the way they were shaking 5 years later when I lifted that veil. But that morning she was laughing. She was crying and laughing at the same time, and she held that stick out to me like it was the most important thing either of us would ever hold. We picked a name before we even knew if we'd need a boy's name or a girl's. Wren. Small and quick and easy to love, like the bird. I used to come home and find her already talking to her stomach, like Wren could hear every word. I built a little wooden bird with my own hands one night in the garage, just something rough and simple, because I didn't know how else to put what I was feeling into something I could actually hold. We lost her at 5 months. I'm not going to tell you what that hospital room sounded like, or what it smelled like, or the exact shape of the silence that followed us home. I'll only tell you this: there is no manual for what grief does to two people who loved each other completely the day before and have no idea how to love each other at all the day after. Josephine needed to talk about it. She needed to say Wren's name out loud at 2 a.m, to cry into my shoulder until she physically couldn't anymore, to be held without being told it would be okay. I didn't know how to give her that. My father had handled every kind of pain in his life by going quiet and getting useful, by fixing gutters, mowing the lawn on schedule, never once saying out loud that something was breaking him. So that's exactly what I did. I went quiet. I picked up more work at the firm. I told myself I was protecting her from watching me fall apart. I didn't realize I was just falling apart somewhere she couldn't see it, which to her looked exactly like a man who didn't love their daughter enough to keep grieving her. We never had one big fight. That's the part that still keeps me up some nights. There was no slammed door, no scene, nothing dramatic enough to point to and say, that's where it broke. We simply ran out of all the small, ordinary conversations that hold two people together, one missed moment at a time, until we were living in the same house, like polite strangers who used to know each other very well. 18 months after we buried a name we never got to use out loud in front of anyone but each other, Josephine filed the papers. I remember exactly where I was standing in the kitchen when she told me. I remember the particular sound the refrigerator made, humming in the silence after she said it, like it was the only honest thing left in the room. I signed every page without arguing a single line. I told myself I was doing it because she deserved a man who could actually cry in front of her, not one who hid in a garage carving birds out of scrap wood at midnight. I never told her that the night the divorce became final, I sat alone in my car, in the empty parking lot of my own firm, the building I had helped design, the one with my name on the same wall as my father's, and I finally let myself fall apart completely. 3 years of careful, useful silence came out of me all at once, and there was no one there to see it but an empty parking lot and a sky full of stars that didn't care either way. I told myself that was the end of it. I told myself a man can grieve something fully, in one night, alone, and then simply close the door behind him and walk forward like nothing is still living inside that room. I believed that for almost 2 years. I believed it right up until the moment. 5 years after that backyard wedding, standing at the front of Hollyhock Chapel, in front of 200 people who loved me, that I lifted a veil, expecting to find the woman who was supposed to be my second chance, and instead found the first woman I ever truly loved, standing there with tears in her eyes. I'm about to tell me a truth I had spent 3 years running from. And the worst part, the part that made my whole body go cold before she'd even said another word, was the look on her face. It wasn't the look of a woman trying to win me back. It was the look of a woman who already knew something about me that I hadn't even let myself know yet. I didn't know any of this was happening, not 1 second of it. I want to tell you anyway, exactly the way it happened, because without it, nothing that came after will make sense. It started with a missing cufflink. Margot was looking for it the week before the wedding, going through the back of my closet shelf, when her hand brushed against something that didn't belong there, an old cigar box, soft at the corners, pushed so far back, it had collected a thin layer of dust. She told me later that her first thought was simple. Probably old photos. Probably nothing. She opened it anyway. Inside was a folded ultrasound photo, the kind doctors hand you in a thin paper sleeve, and across the bottom of it, in handwriting too careful to be anyone's, but a man, trying very hard not to cry while he wrote it, were 2 words. Welcome, Ren. Beneath that was a tiny knitted cap, yellow, soft, never worn. And beneath that, a small wooden bird, rough at the edges, carved by hand, by someone who clearly had no idea what he was doing, but had needed, more than anything, to make something with his own 2 hands when there was nothing left for them to hold. Margot sat down on the floor of my closet and didn't move for a long time. She wasn't angry. That's the part that surprised her the most, she told me. What she felt instead was a quiet, aching kind of clarity, the sudden understanding that she had spent 2 years loving a man who had built her a warm, comfortable room right next door to a door he had never once opened, not even for himself. She thought about all the small things she had noticed and quietly let go of. The half second I went still, whenever a certain kind of silence fell over a room, the way I sometimes said we about decisions that were only ever mine to make, and then caught myself. The photo of my first wife that didn't exist anywhere in my house, but that my entire family had clearly, deliberately, agreed never to mention. She didn't want to spend her marriage standing outside a closed door, and worse than that, she didn't want to be the reason I never opened it. She drove to my mother's house that same evening, the cigar box sitting on the passenger seat beside her like it was something alive. My mother opened the door, saw Margot's face, and somehow already knew. I think you already know what's in here, Margot said, holding out the box. My mother didn't deny it. She made tea with hands that weren't quite steady, and somewhere between the first cup and the second, she told Margot the truth she had been carrying quietly for 3 years, that she had never stopped loving Josephine like a daughter, that she had kept in touch with her in secret out of nothing but worry and love, and that she had watched her own son build a life that looked happy from the road and looked hollow from the porch. I won't ask you to call off your wedding, my mother said. That's not mine to ask, but I think you already know you're not the one who needs to. Margot sat with that for a long moment, turning the little wooden bird over in her hands. No, she finally said. I think I already know exactly who is. She didn't drive home that night. She drove to Josephine. I want you to understand something about Margot, because what she did next could have been cruel, and instead it was the single bravest, kindest thing anyone did for me in this entire story. Josephine almost didn't open the door. 3 years had passed. She had built a whole new life out of the wreckage of the old one. She'd gone back to her maiden name, gone through grief counseling first as someone who needed it, and then trained to give it to other people, because somewhere, in the worst of it, she had decided she wanted to be the steady hand for someone else that she hadn't fully had for herself. She was healed, whole, moving forward by every outward measure anyone could see. She had simply never stopped loving me. She had just learned to carry it quietly, The way you learn to live around an old injury fine, most days, until the weather changes. And then a woman she had never met showed up on her porch, holding a small wooden bird, and the weather changed all at once. They talked for 2 hours. Margot didn't accuse her of anything. She told Josephine she had realized something sitting on the floor of that closet, that she loved me enough to want me to be honest. With myself, with her, with anyone. Even if that honesty cost her the wedding she had already planned down to the flowers. He's never going to choose this on his own, Margot said. Not out loud. He'd marry me with that box still hidden in the closet for the rest of his life, rather than risk hurting either of us by admitting the truth. He needs to be asked the question without being able to prepare an answer first. It was my mother, in the end, who suggested the shape it could take, half out of grief-worn intuition, half out of plain, stubborn love. The dress, as it happened, had already been ordered close enough to Josephine's size that with the right alterations, no one watching from the pews would ever know. The veil was old family lace, heavy enough to hide a face completely until the very last second. And by long tradition in my family, the groom kept his eyes down through the entire walk up the aisle, so that the very first thing he ever saw was her face, and nothing before it. It wasn't built to trick anyone, or to humiliate anyone. Margot was clear about that, every time. It was the only honest question she knew how to ask, without giving me away, to talk myself out of the answer. If everything else fell away, the guilt, the plans, the comfortable, careful safety I had built, who would my heart actually reach for? The second I had no time to prepare a different answer. Josephine said no the first time Margot asked. She said no again the second time, a few days later, sitting across from my mother at the same kitchen table where Margot's tea had gone cold 3 nights earlier. It was my mother who finally got through to her, the small wooden bird sitting on the table between them like a third person in the room. "You're not doing this to take him from anyone," my mother said gently. "You're doing it so the truth finally gets to stand in the same room as both of you, just once. Whatever happens after that is between the two of you to build, or not, but at least it'll be real." Josephine looked at that little carved bird for a long time before she finally said yes. She told me, much later, that the morning of the wedding, standing in front of a mirror, in a dress that wasn't hers, in a chapel that wasn't supposed to be any part of her story anymore, her hands shook so badly that Margot had to help her with the last few buttons herself. The woman who was about to lose her own wedding day, helping the woman who might be about to take it from her. Both of them crying quietly, both of them somehow not angry at each other at all. "You don't have to do this," Margot whispered to her, one hand resting flat against the back of that old white dress. "I know," Josephine whispered back. "That's exactly why I have to." And somewhere on the other side of that chapel door, I was standing at the front of the aisle, in a tuxedo I'd rented 2 sizes too tight in the shoulders, with absolutely no idea that the woman about to walk toward me wasn't the one I thought I was marrying, and that in less than 10 minutes, my whole carefully rebuilt life was about to come apart in front of 200 witnesses. The moment I lifted a veil, I had no idea I should have been afraid of. The veil was still in my hand when the chapel went the wrong kind of quiet, the kind where you can hear 200 people forget how to breathe at the same time. I was looking at Josephine, my ex-wife, standing in another woman's wedding dress, tears sliding down a face I used to know better than my own. "Joe," I said. It came out broken in half. "I couldn't let you do this," she whispered again, because it was the only true thing she had left to give me. "Let me do what?" My voice cracked on every word. "Marry someone you're settling for. Build a whole life around being fine. You were never just fine, Nate. Neither was I. We just got so good at performing it, we almost believed it ourselves." Somewhere behind us, a chair scraped softly against stone floor. A woman's voice rose, steady, cutting gently through 200 people, holding their breath at once. Margot stepped out from the side aisle, still wearing the soft blue dress she had chosen for exactly this moment, not the white one she had spent a year planning to wear. "This was my idea," she said, loud enough for the whole chapel to hear, her voice only a little unsteady. "I love you, Nate. I do. But I love you enough not to spend my life married to half of you, while the other half stayed locked in a box at the back of your closet." She looked at Josephine, and something passed between the two of them that looked almost like gratitude. 2 women who should have been rivals choosing, instead, to be kind to each other in the hardest possible moment. "I think you both already know who you're supposed to be standing here with," Margot said. "It was never going to be me." The chapel had gone completely silent. Somewhere, in the third pew, my mother had stopped trying to hide that she was crying into a handkerchief she had clearly brought for exactly this purpose. Like she'd known all along this day wouldn't end the way the program said it would. I turned back to Josephine. My hands were still shaking, but for the first time in 3 years, I didn't try to hide it from anyone. I never stopped, I said. I didn't know how to tell you that and still let you go, so I just let you go and called it being noble. I think I was just scared. I know, she said. I was scared too. I left because I thought your silence meant you didn't love her enough to grieve her with me. It took me 3 years and a lot of other people's grief to understand that wasn't it at all. You loved her too much to know how to survive it out loud. I still have her cap, I said, and my voice finally broke completely, right there in front of everyone I had ever known. And the bird. I never could put them away for good, no matter how hard I tried. I know, she said, crying freely now. Margot found them. I reached for her hands, the way I used to reach for them across a kitchen table on some ordinary Tuesday morning, years and a whole lifetime ago. Lacing my fingers through hers, in front of 200 stunned witnesses and one extraordinarily generous woman in a blue dress. And for a long moment, neither of us said anything else at all, because there was nothing left between us that needed saying out loud anymore. People ask me sometimes if I felt embarrassed, standing at the front of a chapel falling apart in front of everyone I loved. I tell them the truth. I felt the opposite of embarrassed. I felt like a man who had been holding his breath underwater for 3 straight years, finally allowed to come up for air. We didn't get married that day. How could we have? The license had Margot's name on it, not Josephine's. The flowers were already wilting. The cake in the next room had the wrong initials piped onto it in careful blue icing. But something far more important than a wedding happened in that chapel that afternoon. The truth finally got to stand in the same room as both of us, exactly the way Margot had hoped it would, and neither of us was ever able to look away from it again. We were married for real the following June, in my mother's backyard, under the same kind of paper lanterns Josephine had made with her own hands the very first time. Because, she said, the store-bought ones still didn't have any soul in them. It was small, just family, a handful of close friends. And, at Josephine's own quiet invitation, Margot was there too, sitting near the back with a kind, soft-spoken man named Theo. She had started seeing that spring, a man who looked at her the way I should have looked at her all along, fully, with both eyes open. Before the ceremony, she hugged Josephine so hard that neither of them could speak for a full minute afterward. In the garden of the house I designed and built for the two of us, there's a small wren house mounted on a wooden post just outside the kitchen window. Underneath it sits a hand-carved wooden bird, rough at the edges, the same one that once sat hidden at the back of a closet in a cigar box. It lives out in the open air now, where anyone walking by can see it. Josephine tells her counseling clients that grief doesn't actually go away when you finally face it. It just stops being something you carry alone in the dark and becomes something you can finally set down together in the light with someone who isn't afraid to hold the other end of it with you. Some mornings, an actual wren lands on that little house. I point it out every single time, like it's the first one I've ever seen in my life. She just laughs, takes my hand, and tells me she saw it too. I think about that chapel a lot, about how close I came to spending my whole life with a good woman, in a quiet, comfortable house, with a locked door I never let myself open. About how it took someone else's courage, a bride who wasn't even mine, to ask the one question I was too afraid to ask myself. So here's what I keep wondering, and maybe you should too. How many of us are standing at our own version of that altar right now, about to marry the safe choice, the comfortable choice, the choice that asks nothing hard of us, because some part of us has already decided the truth is too dangerous to look at directly. And if someone you loved lifted that veil off your life tonight, with no warning and no time to prepare an answer, who would be standing there looking back at you, the second the truth finally had nowhere left to hide? If this story found its way into your chest the way it found its way into mine, do me one favor before you go. Subscribe to this channel and turn on that notification bell so you're standing right here with us the next time someone has the courage to lift a veil and tell the truth.